start.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kimberly. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everybody across the globe. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to welcome all of you to today's event on promoting and protecting human rights in the digital era on the occasion of the 51st session of the Human Rights Council. My special thanks go to the co-organizers, Austria, Brazil, Denmark, Morocco, and Singapore, as well as the OHCHR for their valuable support. Also, I would like to express my gratitude to the eminent speakers and participants here with us. The Republic of Korea, in close cooperation with the CORE Group and OHCHR, has taken the initiative to organize this side event in an effort to further explore the ways forward for new and emerging digital technologies guided by a human rights lens. New and emerging digital technologies are transforming the way in which human rights are exercised and enjoyed. And yet, new technologies continue to outpace our understanding of their far-reaching effects and consequences for human rights. Given the constantly evolving nature of new technologies, it is becoming more critical that the international community stays agile in addressing their human rights risks and harnessing the positive potential of new technologies. So we are planning to hold this event for 2 hours program. I will try my best to keep the time schedule because many of you should attend the afternoon session of the Human Rights Council, which starts at 3 p.m. I'm confident that today's opportunity to bring relevant communities to a multi-stakeholder table will contribute to seeking our path forward, where human rights play a critical role as guidepost on the pathway of new and emerging digital technologies. I hope that the insightful observations and perspectives of our speakers will provide fresh inspiration to the future direction of the follow-up resolution. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Gabriela Ramos, Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO, to deliver her welcoming remarks. Ms. Gabriela Ramos oversees UNESCO's contribution to building inclusive and peaceful societies. Her agenda includes the ethics of science and technology. In this domain, she has led the elaboration of UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, AI. Prior to this position, Ms. Ramos served as the Chief of Staff and Sherpa to the G20, G7, APEC, and the OECD. She also has been deeply engaged in the issues relating to digital transformation as an active supporter of the respect for human rights and human dignity in the digitalized world. Today, she was not able to join us live because of a sudden change of her schedule. She is joining us through a pre-recording video. Madame Gabriela Ramos.
I'm delighted to be with you today. Linking science to human rights is not a newfangled objective. Already in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights established the right to benefit from scientific advancements. However, this has to be fully translated into reality and is more urgent than ever considering the speed and the depth of the digital transformation. Suffice to consider that the number of artificial intelligence patent field has soared to more than 30 times higher than in 2015, showing a compound annual growth rate of 77%. Private investment in artificial intelligence has also more than doubled since 2020. And the confinements, the pandemic, has something to do about it. The continuous expansion of the digital world raised also concerns related to the capacity to do harm by enabling an invasion of our privacy or by reinforcing racist and gender-based stereotypes and prejudices, among others. The deepening of divides. While artificial intelligence had become more affordable, we are still in a world of the haves and the haves not. Then, the unknown or intangible consequences of these technologies on our mental health, on privacy, fairness, confidentiality, all these things worry us. But today, we are better placed to respond effectively to these challenges, as we were able to deliver normative frameworks at UNESCO that set universally accepted principles, policies, and standards to guide our actions. For example, the 2017 UNESCO recommendation on science and scientific researches is a bedrock to promote the right to science and the right to benefit from science. It articulates a comprehensive science vision that puts science to the service of people, and I may say, to the planet. It is not only about science contribution to economic progress, but a broader approach ensuring that scientific development benefits societies, benefit our planet, and as a whole, and particularly the most marginalized segments. Science should deliver on the SDGs. And freedom of scientific endeavor, the autonomy of scientists, their space to think and write what they think, and their good judgment tell them, is key for this. We have the tool, but we need effective implementation. We are now developing indicators, a framework of indicators, to reinforce monitoring and awareness-raising activities, and we are also developing a MOOC on science and human rights. We invite you to see it. We recognize that going forward, we should upscale our data collection and analysis and the elaboration of technical guidance. And in collaboration with the High Commissioner on Human Rights of the UN system, we are really developing tangible support to our member states to advance this agenda. And in the very same tradition of the science recommendation, at UNESCO, we are really proud that we delivered for the very first time last November the first global standard on the ethics of artificial intelligence to promote and protect human rights, human dignity, fairness, non-discrimination, sustainability in the digital world. This was adopted by acclamation by all of our 193 member states. They own it, they develop it, it is theirs, and it's really very deep in terms of their provisions. The recommendation drove from an all international frameworks on human rights, and with its ethical approach also left the door open for further reflections. Critically, it goes beyond a mere declaration of ethical values and principles to include concrete policy actions for implementation, to include tools for institutional innovation, and considering the whole stages of the AI's life cycle system. This is crucial because bias and discrimination experienced in AI users are often the products of structural inequalities and exclusion upstream that is derived, for example, for the lack of diversity in the management of technical teams developing these technologies. The recommendation also includes a strong monitoring and implementation framework, where we will be operationalizing through rules, regulation, institutions, all these principles that we care about, that you care about. The principles of transparency, the principles of accountability, responsibility, privacy, no harm, and ensuring the rule of law prevails online as it does offline. Outcomes, as I said before, should be fair and non-discriminatory. And if they are, we need to have recourse to compensation and redressal. Again, exactly as we do in democratic countries with strong rule of law. We're wary of the potential adverse impacts that AI technologies can have on children, on democracies, misinformation, exponentially dividing our societies. We are experiencing this day by day. And therefore, the recommendation takes a strong stance on several issues. For instance, AI systems should not be used for social scoring or massive surveillance purposes, either from the public or of the private platforms. Particular attention must be paid to the psychological and cognitive impact that these systems can have on children and young people. Member states should also invest in and promote digital, media, and information literacy skills to strengthen critical thinking and competencies for individuals to also protect themselves when they interact with these technologies. The recommendation also suggests strong policy actions on the management of data, privacy, and access of information. Actually, it makes a very strong call to change the way we govern data. It sets rules for giving users control over their own data, allowing them to access and delete information as needed, which is not possible in the current times. It also calls for member states to ensure that appropriate safeguards and effective accountability schemes are put in place for the processing of sensitive data. This, therefore, allows for redressal mechanisms in the event of harm. Recognizing that artificial intelligence has the potential to perpetuate inequality and discrimination, a specific focus in the recommendation is hence given to gender equality, one of UNESCO's 2 global priorities. It includes effective measures, including financial support to female endeavors in this area, affirmative action to level the playing field, the promotion of gender parity in every single decision, and this can ensure that women are not only users, but are also shapers of these technologies. And to increase the impact, we're also developing 2 specific tools to implement the recommendation: the readiness assessment methodology and the ethical impact assessment. And this is part of the body of the recommendation. The readiness assessment will help member states have a clear diagnostic on where they are in a continuum of dimensions related to AI and what trajectory should they follow to get close to the benchmark, which is the recommendation. On the other side, the ethical impact assessment can be deployed by states, companies, and all stakeholders, and will facilitate the prediction of consequences and the mitigations of technological risks. We are launching a global forum on the ethics of AI, an annual flagship to advance the state of the art of knowledge on the challenges raised by these technologies. And this global forum is going to be a good opportunity to stake up progress on the implementation. And I want to thank the Czech Republic, who is hosting the very first global forum. We hope to build a robust international coalition towards ensuring the beneficial development and the use of AI all around the world. And to support these endeavors, I want to invite all of the experts to join our network on AI Ethical Experts Without Borders, to go around helping to build this ethical world. We are doing this with the strong guidance of member countries and with them really being engaged. We are advancing capacity building tools, we are advancing assessment mechanisms, and we have a great implementation ambition and are open for cooperation. We're really proud that over 70 member states have already joined the group of friends of the recommendation, or early implementers, which is an alliance of countries to spearhead the vision of an ethical world for artificial intelligence. I am optimistic that there will be even greater participation and more support, not only from member states, but also the private sector and all the stakeholders, the civil society, the academics, the experts. I would like to finish by saying that policies matter. Regulatory frameworks matter. Leadership matter. So this is a very strong call for all of you to exert your leadership and allow us to achieve a good balance of good protection and innovation to flourish when delivering these technologies for the world. And as such, we have much work to do.
Ramos, I really appreciate the Ms. Ramos's insightful and thought-provoking remarks regarding the multiple ethical implications of science and technology in general, and AI in particular, and for that matter, for human rights as well. I cannot agree more that leadership, policy, and cooperation among member states are critical components in ensuring human rights for new technologies. Now, it's a time for the main part of this event. I am very delighted to welcome a distinguished panel of experts. Here with us today are 6 panelists, as you see on the screen, and also concept note of this event. From the core group, we have His Excellency Mr. Engelbert Tweremann, Ambassador for Cyber Affairs at the Austrian Federal Ministry of European and International Affairs. And we have also 3 eminent speakers from relevant UN agencies, Ms. Anna Brian Nugreres, Special Rapporteur on the Right to Privacy, and Ms. Becky Hicks, Director of the Thematic Engagement, Special Procedures and Right to Development Division in the OHCHR, and Mr. Pritam Malur, Head of Emerging Technologies Division in the ITU. Last but not least, we are also joined by the experts in the technology sector and civil society. Mr. Ian Levine, Senior Human Rights Advisor from Meta, and Mr. Peter Michek, General Counsel and UN Policy Managers in Access Now. Please forgive me if I made a mistake in pronouncing your names, and I hope that you will correct it, if any. I believe the panelists' various backgrounds and expertise will help us gain insight into today's topic. I would like to kindly ask all panelists to make presentations within 8 minutes time. On a side note, in an effort to make this discussion interactive, we have opened an online chat where you can send your comments and questions. Our chat moderator will collect them and help us make sure that they are properly addressed. I would first like to invite Ambassador Tweremann. He is the Austrian Ambassador for Cyber Issues based in The Hague. Formerly, he was head of Department for Human Rights at the Austrian Federal Ministry of European and International Affairs and the chair of the EU's Council Working Group on Human Rights. Ambassador, thank you very much for coming. As Ambassador for Cyber Affairs, you are involved in processes relating to cyber and emerging technologies more generally throughout the whole UN system. You may wish to tell us more about challenges and opportunities for human rights in the cyberspace. More generally, from a UN system-wide perspective, where do you see developments that would require a more robust human rights perspective? Where do you see human rights at risk? You have the floor, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And it's a great pleasure to be able to be invited to join you in this interesting discussion today and to learn from all the panelists on these important issues. As you've mentioned, I have a history in human rights, but the last few years was more on the security policy side and now mostly on cyber. So maybe let me also allow in my introductory remarks to point out the human rights elements, so to say, in the cyber-related processes at the UN. Basically, we have the 2. One is on international cybersecurity. We had several UN governmental experts groups and an open-ended working group where agreement was found and reaffirmed repeatedly on a UN normative framework for the responsible behavior of states in cyberspace. And there, a core element of this framework is the affirmation that existing international law, including international human rights law and OHCHR, apply also in cyberspace. This means that any government action, for instance, regarding a regulation, must be fully compliant with their international human rights obligations. It also means that we do not need new human rights standards for the digital space. Our focus should be to clarify the specific scope of existing norms in light of technological developments. And there I believe that the UN human rights system, in particular special procedures, but also the treaty bodies, have an important role to play. The second UN process I want to highlight briefly is on cybercrime. There we see that many countries, particularly also developing countries, but also companies and individuals are seriously affected by cybercrime. We have seen a dramatic increase, including ransomware attacks against entire countries or provinces against critical infrastructure, but also against finance institutions, including microfinance schemes. Such attacks have, and we have seen that, have the potential to threaten and undermine the livelihood of many people. Attacks against hospitals threaten or even cost human lives. Selling or leaking stolen data infringes the right to privacy of the individuals behind this data. This really affects all countries. Therefore, there's broad agreement over the need to improve international cooperation to prevent and counter cybercrime, including online child sexual abuse. And since more than a year, experts from all countries and many multi-stakeholders are participating in the negotiations of a UN ad hoc committee tasked with negotiating a UN cybercrime convention. In its submission to this ad hoc committee, OHCHR has expressed concern that several countries have introduced national cybercrime legislation which restricts human rights, in particular freedom of expression and assembly. It is clear no such thing must happen with a UN convention. One of the most difficult issues is therefore the question of instruments for effective international cooperation. Strong human rights safeguards will have to be a core element of such a UN cybercrime treaty in order to enjoy universal support. But let me go beyond this. And as many of you have discussed in previous meetings, we have also noticed that primarily technical standard setting processes for new technologies increasingly touch upon sensitive human rights questions. We therefore look forward to OHCHR's report on human rights and standardization, especially within the ITU. And I'm very interested to hear from colleagues on this panel in a moment on this. There is no need, in our view, to change technical standard setting processes. But there is a need for a stronger human rights lens and safeguards that ensure special attention to their human rights implications. A number of practical steps could be undertaken, like raising awareness, facilitating dialogue between the tech and human rights community, making human rights expertise available in technical bodies and organizations, including through human rights focal points, ensuring procedural safeguards, greatest possible transparency, and the widest possible participation of civil society organizations. We also need to follow closely UN processes related to digital cooperation and internet governance. Decisive steps towards closing the digital divide will be necessary in order to fulfill human rights, in particular ESC rights. Access to the open and undivided internet is a precondition for the full enjoyment of human rights. It is therefore our hope that in the Global Digital Compact and the review of the World Summit on the Information Society, member states and multi-stakeholders will come together to reaffirm the multi-stakeholder model and the open and free internet. OHCHR is well placed to provide their expert advice and recommendations for integrating human rights in all these processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Tuerman, for your comprehensive overview of this important issue and a few recommendations to safeguard human rights in digital world. Now, let me go over to Ms. Nugreres, Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy. Dr. Nugreres took up her mandate as the Special Rapporteur in October 2021. She is a professor of law, privacy, and ICT at the School of Engineering, University of Montenegro in Uruguay, and also a practicing attorney at law and consultant on data protection. Various discussions have arisen surrounding the issue of privacy in connection to new digital technologies such as big data and AI, ranging from proper legislative and policy frameworks to relative international standards. So let me ask you a question, Madame Nugreres. How do you assess the current situation regarding the right to privacy in digital era? And in what direction do you think the Council, the Human Rights Council, should frame its discussion for ways forward to promote and protect human rights? And please correct me if I pronounce your name wrongly. Madame Nugreres, please go ahead. I think I can not hear you and maybe others as well.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, clear and loud, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And good morning to you all. Thank you very much for your invitation too. It is an honor for me to address this audience, sharing with you some ideas regarding the question Mr. Ambassador posed to me. Privacy and data protection have had a very quick evolution that is a consequence of progress on technology concerning information and telecommunications. Large quantities of information are available and under the control of companies, governments, and other organizations. The large quantity of information circulating makes it very difficult for traditional tools to process it. And this is the moment when algorithms appear in the scene. Data, at the same time, we must say, that has an immense value. Data is needed during the process of production of goods and services. Its value is very important too from the social and economical point of view. From the point of view of technology, we are facing a revolution. It began when internet became available to everyone, when bandwidth increased, when smart mobiles appeared, when social networks pervaded the streets with all its consequences, social, familiar, professional, and the evolution continued towards augmented reality, 3D impressions, machine learning, nanotechnology, robotics, and so on. All these disruptive processes show that we are in a process of change, of social transformation, that we must assume as such, giving away to artificial intelligence or to the use of social networks, but at the same time, being conscious of the risks implied, learning to assume these risks as real possibilities and learning how to face them. Which is the challenge nowadays then? It is to innovate using data, using personal data too, but at the same time, it is to assume the risks that this implies. Data is everywhere, helping in our routinary acts in the kitchen with Internet of Things, predicting the weather, detecting illnesses, saving lives, helping us to save the planet. It has changed the way we organize our finances. It has changed the way we face our everyday economies. It makes it possible to analyze degrees of pollution in our cities or to study how to improve transportation of persons and goods. The use of data enables artificial intelligence applications. It enables blockchain, digital tracking, and at the same time, it affects our security, generating risks. By affecting our security, it affects our fundamental rights and our right to privacy included. No privacy is possible if there is no security. In this month of September, a case emerged in my country, Uruguay. A school teacher noticed that 3 children were hurting themselves with their sharpeners. They were 10, 11-year-olds. They were at school, and yes, it was with their sharpeners. An investigation was done, and they came to conclusions. One of the boys had done this harm to himself in other previous opportunities. The 3 were receiving orders from an app that came on their phone, suggesting those actions to hurt themselves with their sharpeners. The lack of security, of cybersecurity in this case, is permeating our society and showing us these paradigmatic cases that affect our children. Children, as well as teenagers, are especially vulnerable in our society. They need to be protected in the real world and also in the virtual world. They may be victims of psychological or emotional harm. They can injure themselves or can even be dangerous for other persons. As said, the evolution of information and communications technologies is very fast, and its repercussions bring risks to human beings. Let's think on examples. Think of Cambridge Analytica and all the persons who sold their data without having clear its potential repercussions. Let's think of Jamal Khashoggi, whose data were interpreted by governmental authorities as a cause of death penalty. And we could continue. Biometric tools enable the identification of human weaknesses. Making use of these weaknesses puts us at a serious risk, even more when we focus on the use of artificial intelligence and bioengineering elements. Each of these and their potential combination is changing our lives. As a way of confronting this situation, two tools are of fundamental importance. One is awareness. The second is education. They are the basis of our greatest challenge, which is to teach how to detect and prevent risks on our fundamental rights. This is a way to face the challenges of our times and to protect people from the negative effects of artificial intelligence and of technological disorganization. There are other tools we can mention: privacy impact assessments, evaluation of risks, emphasizing on the use of transparency and accountability, proactive responsibility, anonymization. To implement these systems of modernization of the protection of privacy is an important challenge which has direct influence in the necessity to provide quality in all digital services. It can be done with the collaboration of public and private actors, civil society and NGOs, in a multi-stakeholder approach according to ethics and respecting diversities. The democratic state of law supposes the existence of rights, that the fundamental right to privacy and data protection, which are enshrined, and they also need to be made effective. Virtual existence of those rights is not enough, as this human right protects the persons by protecting their data, the data that are part of their personality, as each person should have the right to dispose of their data freely and autonomously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madame Nugres, for your thought-provoking remarks, focusing on how to deal with privacy risks from the flood of data flowing in our era of information revolution. Now, let us hear from the next panelist, Ms. Peggy Hicks. As many of you know very well, since January 2016, Ms. Hicks has served as a director of the Thematic Engagement, Special Procedures and Right to Development Division in the OHCHR after serving around 10 years at Human Rights Watch. Now, let me direct my question to Madame Hicks to better assess the diverse spectrum of the human rights implications of new technologies. The Human Rights Council adopted the first resolution on new and emerging digital technologies and human rights in 2019, followed by the adoption of the subsequent resolution last year. In moving forward, what do you think are the key issues that have to be dealt with in the follow-up resolutions? Which topics and aspects would we need to delve deep into? So that is my question. Ms. Hicks, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lee. It's just a pleasure to be with you and with this distinguished panel today to have a chance to think about and discuss these important issues. Before turning directly to sort of the role of the Human Rights Council, let me say a little bit about where we currently stand with regard to digital technologies and human rights. I think one of the things that those that are in their 5th or 6th decade, as I am going forward, is that we've learned really that human rights progress isn't as inevitable as we would have hoped. We've seen in recent decade the enormous inequalities that have grown, the threat to our planet through climate change and threats to the environment, a growing landscape of conflict. And at the same time, I think we've all looked to digital technologies and their enormous promise for addressing some of these challenges. Unfortunately, though, the techno-optimism that we had in the early days has really evaporated in the face of the serious threats that have accompanied the emergence of digital technologies, with an online environment now that really feeds society's ills and the potential to undermine democracy, and the rapid rollout of technologies relying on artificial intelligence, fundamentally altering both our online and our public spaces. So in looking at that environment, I've said many times that digital technology may well be the tipping point for the direction of human rights in the coming decade. Will we make progress, or will we have a retrogression that would threaten rights for all of us? And in doing so, we have to look at what are the real challenges for addressing the digital technology and human rights age. And in doing that, I'd like to point out three things. The first is the pace of change. I think what we have seen is that the evolution of technologies is happening so quickly, and it's quite a challenge for the way that we address these issues. And are we really capable of keeping up with and putting in place the constraints and guardrails around these technologies that need to exist? The second big challenge is that while we've always recognized the enormous impact that private enterprises and business can have on human rights, I think that's risen to an entirely different scale now. And this role of business and our ability to have an impact on business from a human rights standpoint is a key challenge as well. And the third is really the capacity of national, regional, and international institutions to engage in and address the challenges we face in a digital world. In each of those three areas, we have enormous constraints and challenges that we face. But I want to emphasize at the outset that the human rights framework is really an essential foundation for us to find the solutions we need given those challenges. First of all, the human rights framework provides implementable, fair standards for resolving rights that are in tension. It has a well-developed set of legal commentary behind it and a growing body of work that allows us to have practical guidance on how it can be applied in this complex space. The second point is that we have the UN guiding principles for business and human rights within the human rights framework. And that really is truly an essential tool in that it addresses not only the role of private companies themselves, but also the state role vis-a-vis companies and how the state obligation to protect human rights means that there needs to be engagement around setting those guardrails around the activities of private enterprises in the digital technology space. And third, the human rights framework is an essential tool because it has universality. We say that word so often, but in this context, I think it's incredibly important. We know that these technologies have global reach, and that's what's being done in one place has an impact elsewhere. But we also know that we're living in a world where human rights are contested. If we can approach the digital technology space from a commonly held platform of human rights, that will allow us to make more progress going forward. So turning now to the role of the Human Rights Council, I'm so glad, Ambassador, that you referred back to the 2019 resolution. And it's absolutely critical that the Human Rights Council has really stepped up in those 3 years to enhance the engagement around these digital technology issues in a variety of ways. Obviously, of course, there's the resolution that the core group has put forward on new and emerging technologies that joins with, of course, resolutions on the right to privacy and also on the internet that have given space for additional work as well, and a number of resolutions that have brought in elements around the digital side, including, for example, on human rights defenders. And we're seeing, of course, new initiatives this session as well in more specialized areas relating to arms and neurotechnology. We also have seen that the special procedures, and I'm so glad to be here with Special Rapporteur Nogueras, the work of special procedures continues to grow. The privacy mandate, the freedom of expression mandate have had a substantial role here, but I want to emphasize that really the digital work has extended across the range of special procedures with work on older persons, economic and social rights, health, a broad range of issues where the special procedures have given analysis and commentary that's extraordinarily helpful here. On our side, we've had the opportunity in the past 2 years to really look at these issues in a variety of ways. And I just wanted to highlight our 2 most recent reports, which give a sense of the role that the Human Rights Council can play. we issued in June 2022 our report on internet shutdowns, which really shows that internet shutdowns are a compelling marker of a deteriorating human rights situation, and that shutdowns are happening in circumstances where, from a human rights standpoint, they're all the more important. What we found is trends pointing to shutdowns happening in controlling information environments during political crisis and around, for example, elections. So those are key environments for us to look at. But then what we also found is that there's really a limited amount of information available. Our NGO colleagues, I'm glad to be here with Peter from Access Now as well, are doing a wonderful job trying to assess this space. But the reality is there is limited transparency around when and why shutdowns are occurring. For example, despite 228 episodes recorded by civil society groups across 55 countries between 2016 and 2021, in a number of those cases, those are the cases in which about half of those, the 228 represents the body of cases where we don't know. There was no public disclosure of why the shutdown was happening and how it was happening. So we need more transparency. We know that they're often justified public security and national public safety and national security grounds, but the reality is what we've seen is that there's little evidence that the shutdowns contribute to those goals. And in fact, by limiting reporting and they can create an environment in which violence and impunity can flourish. We've also seen an enormous impact from shutdowns. I think we have to emphasize how despite perhaps a narrow purpose, they actually have impacts across society, including across the delivery of essential services, and they result in real life harms. In that report, we called for 4 key steps. First, for states to stop imposing shutdowns. Second, to ensure more visibility over what is happening. We need better real-time information, and so that means both states and companies have to say more. But we also called for a collaborative mechanism for the systematic collection of information on mandated disruptions, and it could include, for example, a comprehensive and publicly accessible database of orders that limit access to the internet, which includes the underlying reasons for their scope. Third, we called on telecommunications and other relevant companies to have to do more to explore the lawful measures to challenge disruptions and to have more transparency themselves. And finally, we emphasize that internet shutdowns need to be seen as a core aspect of our work to enhance digital connectivity. We see across the globe an important effort to end the digital divide, but the reality is that connectivity conversation and the assistance that's given to connectivity is not being linked up with what happens when the internet is shut down, and we need to bring those two streams to work together. The second report I wanted to highlight is the report just released on the right to privacy. And that gave us a chance to dive deeper into 3 crucial topics: surveillance technology, encryption, and mass surveillance. What we found in that report is that the right to privacy is more at risk today than ever before, and that application of the human rights framework is key. We know that any interference to the right to privacy needs to be compatible with international human rights law, including the principles of legality, legitimate aim, necessity, and proportionality, and non-discrimination. With regard to surveillance technology, we highlighted the need for human rights due diligence, including human rights impact assessments, and again, transparency around the use of surveillance technologies and more public debate about their use. We reiterated the call of the office and of the prior High Commissioner for states to implement moratoriums on domestic and transnational sale and use of surveillance systems. On encryption, we noted that encryption is a key enabler of privacy and security online and is essential for safeguarding a broad range of rights. With that in mind, we raised concerns over the efforts that some states are taking to restrict access to and use of encryption technology, including bans and criminalization of encryption, mandatory backdoors, and client-side scanning. Finally, we talked about public and mass surveillance and noted that those measures too need to be strictly necessary and proportionate for achieving important legitimate objectives. We focused, for example, on biometric recognition systems, which should only be used in public spaces to prevent or investigate serious crimes or serious public safety threats. We also noted surveillance of social media should be done on the basis of clear, publicly accessible legal frameworks that define permissible grounds, prerequisites, and authorization procedures, and which include adequate oversight mechanisms. And as noted earlier, we're very excited about the technical standard setting project, which is underway. We believe it's a crucial approach to break down some of the silos and really look at, as Ambassador Tierman has stressed, how we can bring a human rights lens into technical standard setting through use of techniques like human rights focal points, greater civil society engagement, and other pieces. So turning to specifically to what can be done through the Human Rights Council and what direction we should head, I'd make 3 general points about Human Rights Council engagement. The first is part of what we've seen is that we need spaces for more intensive analysis, more detailed recommendations, rather than broad brush overviews. The reality is these are complex issues, and if we take them at a bird's eye view, we won't really get into the level of detail that we need to be able to provide the practical solutions that states and companies are looking for. The second point I'd make is that we need a more global approach. The reality is that challenges are different in different regions. And right now we've had a very global lens. And I think that it would be very helpful if we could find a way to develop a more engaged approach that looks more at regional challenges or country-based challenges as well. Third, I think we need to find greater synergies between all the efforts that are underway and develop an overarching framework for them. The initiative that we just mentioned on the technical standard setting is a good example of how we can engage in silo breaking and collaboration. It might be helpful to do that in other areas as well. Overall, in terms of what more work needs to be done, I think that more work needs to be done on digital technology with economic and social rights impacts. And one particular area that I would suggest should be considered by the core group and others as they look at the next resolution is around digital identification programs. We really see this as a cross-cutting topic that is growing in its relevance. It's something that has engaged development actors and the World Bank. We note that a couple of weeks ago, civil society groups wrote a public letter to the World Bank about their digital ID program and demanding greater civil society engagement and greater transparency around it. So these are issues that are very much in the public eye right now, and the public digital ID systems have such an important impact on economic and social rights and development. We think it'd be a very interesting topic to dive deeper into. So with that one suggestion, I would just, again, thank you for the opportunity to engage and look forward to the further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks, for introducing some important work of your office about the issue in front of us and providing us with your valuable insights regarding the future direction of the Council resolution based upon the human rights-centered approach to new and emerging digital technologies. In fact, we have been working very closely all the way and look forward to our even closer cooperation with you and your team, along with other stakeholders to advance this issue in the future. Okay, now, next we have a distinguished speaker from ITU, Mr. Malur. He is the head of Emerging Technologies Division at the International Telecommunication Union, IPU. With more than 2 decades of experience in ICTs, he is an expert on AI and international cyber-related public policy matters. He has been deeply involved in the annual AI for Global Good Summit. Mr. Malur, I have 2 questions to ask. I would appreciate it if you could respond to them all together within the specified time. The first question is, as a specialized UN agency on information and telecommunication technologies, with a core mandate of advancing universal connectivity, can you tell us about ITU's experience with the technology for good, especially on new and emerging technology, digital technologies, and human rights? That is my first question. Second question concerns the ITU's cooperation with OHCHR. Technical standard setting is an integral part of IPU's work that has great potential to contribute to sustainable development. In particular, the recent Human Rights Council Resolution 47/23 explicitly requests the OHCHR to collaborate with ITU and other relevant standard development organizations in preparing the OHCHR expert consultations. How do you see this collaboration happening? Mr. Malur, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And let me first begin by thanking you and the co-organizers for inviting me and the ITU to participate in this session. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. So ITU, as the UN specialized agency for ICTs, is an advocate for tech for good. Advancing global connectivity is our core mandate, and tremendous progress has been made in this respect over the years. 2/3 of humanity is obviously now connected, but much work needs to be done. Just last week, we released our latest figures, and an estimated 2.7 billion people, or 1/3 of the world's population, is still unconnected to the internet in 2022. And even among many of those connected, they may not be meaningfully connected. So as the oldest UN agency with a history in technology for more than 150 years, ITU subscribes to, actively promotes, and has consistently adhered to the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And while access to the internet has not been formally recognized as a fundamental right, many countries are increasingly recognizing it as a necessity and a right for their citizens. At ITU, we actively promote the right and importance of access to means of communication. This is also firmly enshrined in the principles that were agreed to at the heads, by heads of states, world leaders at the World Summit of Information Society in 2005. And in this effort, ITU is quite unique in the UN system because we have a membership which is, not only 193 member states, but we also have more than 1,000 private sector companies, universities, international and regional organizations as our members. So as a technical agency, as an international standards body, we support our members according to our mandate, and keeping in pace with rapid advancements in UN emerging technologies, such as, for example, AI, of course, 5G, 3G, 4G, 5G. These are all ITU standards. We're already working on 6G. Internet of Things, quantum, security technologies such as blockchains, and many, many others, And it's clear, the potential offered by these new and emerging technologies, as well as the risks associated. These are all multifaceted global issues that require a global dialogue. Not a single agency or an organization cannot address the whole range of topics. And we recognize that as the ITU. We provide a consensus-driven platform for our stakeholders to come together and address these matters holistically. I'll give you a couple of examples. Of course, our standard-setting groups, which are called study groups, which are largely driven by our private sector members, our academic members. We also have large multi-stakeholder forums. The AI for Good is a very well-known one that you mentioned, Your Excellency. It's now a digital platform post-COVID, where AI innovators and problem solvers, learn, build, connect to identify practical AI solutions to advance the UN SDGs. It's by far the leading UN platform on AI. It's organized by ITU in partnership with 40 sister agencies, co-convened with the government of Switzerland. The second example, again, a well-known example, is the annual WSIS Forum hosted here in Geneva, co-organized by ITU, UNESCO, UNDP, and UNCTAD. It's the largest ICT4D platform in the world. And in all this, we rely on our partners, our members, our stakeholders, to provide the expertise to ensure that all our work, including our technical standard setting work, is informed by the necessary ethical and human rights perspectives that, they as the leads in these areas can bring into this conversation. I'll give you a couple of examples when I respond to the second part of my answer. The outputs of all these conversations will feed directly into our formal ITU processes and agreements through the various channels. I'd also like to highlight one more mechanism, within the UN system itself. We have an interagency working group on AI, which was set up by the HLCP, which is the UN Internal Coordination Mechanism, in 2021. It's co-chaired by ITU and UNESCO with 42 UN agencies and bodies as members. And the focus is to bring, UN system-wide policy coherence and programmatic coordination in our AI work. And the group aims to promote, the development and use of AI that's underpinned by ethical principles, by its human rights-based, trustworthy, safe, sustainable, contributes to the SDGs. And OHCHR is an active member of this group. It's very clear. Society is at an inflection point when it comes to technology. There's tremendous potential, but obviously we need to get things right, and that requires all of us working together. I'm very glad that this conversation is happening. Now to the second part of your question, specifically on our standards work. As a technical UN agency, one of our core areas of work is standard setting. We are very proud of our decades of history in this area. This work primarily takes place through our what we call as study groups, where experts come together, they work collaboratively in responding to the priorities of industry and our membership. Some of the areas that they're working on, efficient management and use of radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbit resources, as I mentioned, 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G, all ITU standards, future network and cloud computing, security standards, including blockchain technologies, IoT standards, smart cities, quantum computing, AI, many areas, And this is all specialized work, which requires technical experts to come together. And it calls for the participation of thousands of experts, representing government, industry, academia. And these are largely driven by private sector. It's based on contributions, inputs coming from the members. And the resulting standards have always been consensus driven, in terms of the support of ITU membership. Recognizing that new and emerging technologies are rapidly changing, rapidly evolving, we also have flexible technical mechanisms, which are called focus groups for quick development of specifications. They're open to everyone, irrespective of whether they are members of the ITU or not. And they work on different areas, of emerging technologies. Just as a few examples, AI and IoT for digital agriculture, which we do with the FAO, AI and health with the WHO, 5G and communications, AI and environment with UNEP and WMO, where, across these groups, ITU provides the technical expertise, the other partner UN agencies provide the domain expertise, and also the multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary nature of the experts. It ensures that, the necessary human rights, ethical perspectives are injected into the conversation. Example, a focus group on autonomous driving as ethicists that are participating in the discussions, And here, let me invite all the UN agencies, because all UN agencies are also invited, they can participate in various capacities to keep our members, our experts informed of their own ethical and human rights guidance work, where these discussions are taking place. For example, in the focus group on AI and health, where WHO is a partner. The WHO guidance on ethics and governance of AI for health, has played a key role here. And again, we look forward to having experts from OHCHR join us in the standardization meetings, in areas of interest, especially new and emerging technologies, so that they can provide the necessary guidance that are coming out of the Human Rights Council, in the standards development process. I recall in the past, the then Special Rapporteur on Privacy joined several of our technical security standards meetings. And of course, the secretariat of the two organizations are also increasing the collaboration, which is a very good sign. From ITU, we look forward to participating and contributing to the technical expertise and lessons learned in any consultations that OHCHR will organize on the topic. So with this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Malur. I really appreciate your comprehensive introduction to ITU's work on promoting digital connectivity and human rights, and also your cooperation with the human rights community. Next, we have our panelist. Next panelist, Mr. Levine. Mr. Ian Levine is a senior human rights advisor in Meta's human rights team and supports the implementation and oversight of human rights standards in Meta's product, policy, and programming efforts. He worked at Amnesty International in the late 1990s and spent 16 years in Human Rights Watch, carrying out extensive work in the human rights and humanitarian field. Mr. Levine, the perception and understanding of the issue of human rights regarding new technologies seem to diverge in different sectors, and the technology sector is faced with increasing challenges. How do we bridge the linguistic and conceptual gaps between the technological, human rights, and diplomatic communities to protect human rights in digital world? And what more can the private sector do to help drive the implementation of the principles of Resolution 47/23? That's my question. Mr. Levine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm extremely happy to be here with such a distinguished panel and extremely encouraged by so many of the comments that have already been made, which I think suggests that although we do have many linguistic and conceptual gaps yet, there's also, I think, more consensus on some critical issues than perhaps we recognize and realize sometimes. So really happy to be here. I do want to say that the title of the panel, I think, is excellent and important. And I want to flag the subheading of the title of the panel, which talks about human rights as a guidepost on the pathway of new and emerging digital technologies. I think it's an important phrase. I would almost strengthen that and talk about the importance of human rights as the moral compass on the pathway of new and emerging digital technologies. But certainly the idea that human rights have to guide us as we address the extraordinarily rapid evolution of digital technologies that other speakers have already referred to is a very powerful and important idea, and I think one that is helping provide a really good basis for today's conversation. More than 15 years ago, during a UN reform process that he was leading, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, said that there are 3 pillars to the United Nations: peace and security, economic development, and human rights. And he went on to say that without peace and security, there can be no development. Without economic development, there can be no peace and security. And without human rights, there can be neither peace and security nor development. Very important words, and words that remain incredibly relevant to this day. And I think we have all struggled to make a reality of that commitment to human rights and to the idea that human rights are both essential in their own right, as well as being essential for the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals and the peace and security agenda. And I think none of us can be complacent about the fact that we are yet to fulfill that vision of human rights at the heart of the UN agenda. And of course, since Kofi Annan spoke those words back in around 2005, life, as previous speakers have pointed out, has become much more complex. Social media, digital technologies have become ingrained into practically every aspect of our lives and virtually every aspect of what the UN system does. Peace and security, economic development, human rights are all profoundly impacted for good and sometimes for ill by digital technologies. In addition, as we heard both from Peggy Hicks and the speaker from the ITU, the digital divide is increasingly recognized as one of the most critical fault lines separating the haves from the have-nots. Back in the 1980s, even before Kofi Annan made his remarks about human rights in the UN system, the famous science fiction writer Isaac Asimov wrote that the saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. It's a very powerful quote. It's a very prescient quote, I think, and it sums up many of the questions that have been posed to this panel and posed particularly to me in talking about the linguistic and conceptual gaps between the technological, human rights and diplomatic communities. Simply the pace of change in technology provides us, I think, with a huge challenge to ensure that technology serves humans and their rights and not vice versa. Now, in the midst of that challenge, there has been much, I think, really important progress. And Peggy Hicks, I think, spoke very well about some of the really important work that has been done in recent years at the Human Rights Council to help drive forward the debate on digital technologies and human rights. And as she mentioned, the report on internet shutdowns, last week's report on privacy, the application of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights to the tech sector. And I want to say more about the importance of the UN guiding principles in a moment. But also the work, as she said, of UN special rapporteurs on privacy, on human rights defenders and freedom of expression. I think really important work to advance the integration of human rights in the digital space and in the digital era to that work. But we're clearly in the early stages of bringing human rights standards to the digital world. And while I agree with Ambassador Teuermann's comment earlier on in the panel that we don't need new human rights, we certainly need a lot more work together to develop consensus on how we implement and how we bring together the UN, governments, private sector, and civil society together to most effectively promote and protect and respect human rights in the digital world. I just want to say a few words about some of the work that we're doing at Meta to give just a flavor of the importance that we give to this agenda and to human rights, and then just finish off with a couple of maybe suggestions about the way forward. Since 2019, we have developed a human rights team. Since 2021, we have now a human rights policy, an ambitious human rights policy, which is centered around the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, as well as other critically important human rights standards, the Bill of Rights, the Convention on CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and others. So we're seeking to affirm the importance and the centrality of a human rights framework to our work, recognizing that under the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, we have responsibilities to respect human rights. And as part of that work, in addition to creating a team and a policy and publicizing a policy, we've sought to take a whole series of measures to demonstrate our seriousness in living up to those commitments. The launch of the Oversight Board, which helps to provide access to remedy, the creation of a Human Rights Defender Fund, and most recently the launching of our first ever Human Rights Report. A report that's far from perfect, but at least is a step forward and one that we will look to build on going forward. Most critically, we're looking to integrate human rights standards, human rights commitments that we have made through our policy into the work across the company, including, for example, across our work in artificial intelligence, a critical area of work which has been flagged by several previous speakers, where we are seeking to make sure that human rights informs the way in which we look at artificial intelligence across privacy and security, fairness and inclusion, transparency, accountability, and governance, and so on. We're also looking to publish human rights due diligence work, whether it be on specific countries like the Philippines, Cambodia, and Indonesia, or on product-focused work like end-to-end encryption, which is, as Peggy Hicks mentioned when she talked about the privacy report, lies absolutely at the heart of protecting people's freedom of expression and privacy and their ability to communicate safely in the digital world. There's a lot more to be done, an enormous amount of work to be done. More transparency, more accountability, more due diligence, enormous challenges ahead with the metaverse, and a lot more work engaging with both the UN and civil society. But we are looking to strengthen our engagement with the UN, and I do want to commend the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for some really important work in engaging with the tech sector in a constructive and collaborative way to recognize shared issues of concern in the human rights world, the importance of a unified internet, hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, internet fragmentation, internet shutdowns, protection of human rights defenders and others, which provides a really important basis for very strong collaboration as we move forward to grapple with many of the challenges that have been flagged today. We meet regularly with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as with a variety of other key actors, special rapporteurs, the Office of the Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide. And increasingly, we're looking to engage with UN country teams, particularly in countries in conflict or countries facing polarizing and challenging elections, to explain to them our community standards and help them to understand how they can raise concerns directly with Meta when when they see problematic and inflammatory speech on the platform, or where they can see links between online conduct and real world harm. And these are really important relationships that we're looking to development. Similarly, in engaging more broadly with civil society, we are intensifying our efforts on the protection of human rights defenders and journalists, and in fact have made a very explicit commitment to the protection of human rights defenders in our human rights policy. We're strengthening our trusted partner network, and just last week, to give one example, engaged with a number of investors to brief them on our human rights work, and to hear a lot of often very critical questions about what we are and are not yet doing. Let me just finish with a couple of thoughts about how we can move forward together as a community. And I really do want to commend Ambassador Lee for bringing together a panel that reflects the UN perspectives, government, civil society, as well as the private sector. We clearly still, as other speakers have said, need to do more to ensure that human rights are explicitly and clearly centered in all of our debates and dialogues and the development of policies going forward. We need to do more, not less engagement. We need to listen more carefully to each other as well as to speak. And we need to find ways of breaking down complex language, both on the technical side as well as on the legal side, to identify the core moral and principled components that lie at the heart of this debate, to ensure that we are engaging more clearly. And we need to focus on some of the most critical policy challenges going forward. There's been a lot that's good and positive. Just to give a couple of examples, the work done to promote and defend an open internet last year through the Declaration for the Future of the Internet, which was driven by the US and the EU, important step forward. The Copenhagen Pledge on Technology and Democracy, again, is a strong commitment to make digital technologies work for and not against democracy and human rights, and that's really important. And we particularly, I think, need to support not only the ongoing work of the Human Rights Council, but also the UN Secretary General's focus on digital cooperation, and his proposal through his Our Common Agenda report to develop a global digital compact that will promote shared principles for an open, free, and secure digital future that will be rooted in human rights. And the last point I want to make is on human rights in situations of conflict. While commending the Human Rights Council for, I think, really important progress that it is making and a really important agenda, frankly, the UN Security Council, I think, is behind the Human Rights Council in assessing and understanding the impact that digital technologies have on the protection of human rights in situations of conflict and crisis, situations on its agenda. And I very much hope that we can see more engagement with the UN Security Council to see how we can strengthen support for the protection of rights online in situations of conflict. Much more to be said, but I've already spoken too long. So thank you again, Ambassador, and I look forward to the questions and discussion going forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levine. Thank you for your valuable input, especially from the perspective of the technology sector, with a stress on the importance of wide multi-stakeholder cooperation and engagement. Thank you also for your valuable suggestions on the way to move forward. By the way, I like your phrase, the moral compass has the role to be played by human rights that will guide the pathway of new technology development. Thank you very much for that. And last but not least, I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Micek. Mr. Peter Micek is General Counsel at Access Now and has spent the past decade advocating freedom of expression, privacy, and access to information online. Leading the legal arm of Access Now, Mr. Micek is deeply engaged in the organization's operations, including the annual RightsCon event series. He also lectures on internet governance and human rights at the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Mr. Micek, again, I have two questions, two questions to ask to you, and I would appreciate your responding to them all together. Mr. Micek, most international human rights instruments and mechanisms were initially conceived for the offline world and may not reflect the realities of this digital age. With your legal background and your current role as UN policy manager at Access Now, what do you think is the most urgent action to be taken by international community to advance international norms and laws in the digital sphere? That's my first question. And my second question is about regulatory standards or guidance on new digital technologies. There are more and more conversations about human rights standards for emerging technologies, but human rights are still not sufficiently included in the regulatory standards. The overlap of multiple codes of ethics and legal standards, or the lack of practical guidance, also remains a challenge. So where do you see the role of the UN in this regard? And how can we ensure meaningful civic engagement in international tech governance? That is my second question. Mr. Micek, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Those are pressing questions, but I think I will take the opportunity, as Ian did, to step back in time a bit. As far as what's urgent, I think what's old is new again. I would point us to actually the founding of the International Telecommunication Union in 1865, which was responding to developments in information and communications technologies. There, right at the start of this UN organ, we see technologies propelling the need for discussions of international cooperation and how that cooperation can be better fostered through agreements on how the technology should be developed. And to put it simply, there were telegraph standards being developed independently in different countries and by different technologists. But states realized how important this tool could be to their work of diplomacy and international cooperation, and how much that all depended on there being some consistent protocol, some system of language and signifiers, so that these different tools could speak to each other. And that continued with the creation of the radio frequency radio telecommunications service of the ITU, where according to its own records, the Prince of Prussia was just leaving the United States after a state visit and tried to radio the US president at the time, but his transmission from his boat in the Atlantic was denied because the protocols weren't up to standards. And so there again, we see that the states want to make use of these tools for their good cooperation to enhance peace and security and development, and that actually they found these tools immensely useful just as they were being developed, and that is continued. And I think you'll see in what we see as rather timeless language in the UN Charter. Article 19, the UDHR, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights speaks to communication across borders, regardless of frontiers, across media, and that visionary language really does welcome and herald the age of the internet that we are in the midst of. And I think it's important to note that these stakes were laid, and I just found out last week that there was actually a 1968 conference on human rights with a side event, you might call it, on information and communication technologies. To its credit, Jamaica convened this conference, saying already the advances in technology of which we are so proud have begun to present us with new human rights problems unforeseen by those who drafted the Universal Declaration. problems for which new standards of conduct may need to be enunciated. 1968, and they actually focused on privacy with regard to personal data and these new technologies as keys. So, you know, we think this work we are doing is urgent, and it is new in the sense of the scale of cooperation and the direct impacts we see on the range of human rights and development and peace and security issues. But the seeds are planted far back, and I think the UN should, you know, take credit for serving as this convener on new and emerging ICTs, and certainly continue and redouble those efforts. I think COVID certainly catalyzed a lot of the trends we see of the growing power of corporations to move goods and services through digital platforms, and the relative weakness oftentimes of states in confronting, you know, truly global issues such as the supply chain, say, not to mention the virus. In this context, though, you know, the states are not waiting for the UN's permission. States are actually contracting out their most essential duties, and this runs from military contracting to lethal autonomous weapon development to sophisticated spyware that, you know, is extremely expensive and is that states are buying off the shelf and using to you know, invade people's private lives and disrupt their professional activities. It's seemingly without regard to the rule of law. We see states moving forward as well with, as we've heard, artificial intelligence systems or systems that claim to be artificially intelligent that are being used to really quantify the human body and to track us and develop new indicators and track those indicators in both the development and the security sphere. And we heard from Peggy Hicks. Thank you for recognizing our recent open letter to the World Bank, which again does also bring in this need that we agree with to speak to the economic and social and cultural rights and the development sector as to their use of new and emerging technologies and how those impact fundamental human rights. In this case, through these digital identity systems that often use biometric data. Again, the quantification of extremely sensitive and personal information about our bodies is happening as we speak, and the UN must urgently kind of speak to, again, get ahead of this development of ICTs, which absolutely impacts international cooperation. In the security sphere as well, we see human security more and more being intertwined with digital rights and freedoms. And for us at Access Now, we focused on state sanctions in these recent crises, as well as content governance apparatuses with regard to really acute conflicts, displaced movements of displaced persons, and places where access to the internet should and is being recognized as an essential humanitarian need. And so in this regard, we fought for access to the internet and encryption technologies and software and services for those in sanctioned countries and environments, as, you know, one of the last places that they can access accurate information and you know, spread that information and collect and document things like atrocities and acute human rights violations. We will be pushing the conversation with reports coming up from Access Now on state sanctions and digital rights, as well as content governance in crisis. And then I do want to speak a bit to, you know, what was left out, as Jamaica said a bit in 1968, I think, looking at these new types of harms and really new actors that were left out of those initial discussions around the founding of the UN. That's, of course, multinational corporations, but also I think civil society. I don't think either were really envisioned to develop in the sense they did, and to have the kind of reach and instantaneous urgent impacts that we see. on the NGO side, the UN has stuttered but moved forward with things like the NGO committee, some structure to welcoming in NGO voices. I think in the private sector, it is still the Wild West, and we don't see standards for how the UN should interact with technologists and with digital platforms and providers. And in that sense, we really welcome new due diligence standards that speak to how UN entities and agencies should assess the potential human rights impacts of their partnerships with the tech sector and these private firms. And getting to some of those urgent issues, where we see the need for, I think, as you said in the second question, the role of the UN with regard to all these multiple overlapping ethics and legal standards, but as well as the need for practical governance guidance. I would say that, at the primary level, we don't look to the UN for ethical guidance or even best practice. We want, as I think Peggy explained, a place to contest and elaborate on norms through clear, open, accepted procedures and agreed upon frameworks. These frameworks that unfortunately mainly just apply to sovereign states, but are at least accepted, and we can have above board kind of conversations based on this common language in these frameworks. And that continues to be key. And the Human Rights Council is at the very heart of this project. And it must elaborate standards that reverberate and resound throughout the UN system. And those standards should center the human body, again, which is under attack from datification, commodification, and really division by these extremely powerful entities, whether in the development sector through these digital identity type programs, and security contexts through spyware, through surveillance technologies, through biometric surveillance, and we really put it on the Human Rights Council to play that essential role. However, as we know, we can't stop there. The UN the Human Rights Council, did pass a unanimous resolution in 2016 condemning internet shutdowns. In 2011 and 2012, the HRC declared that human rights apply online as offline, but we're still just seeing some of the most powerful, corporations pass their first human rights policies, a decade later. Internet shutdowns, as we know, have proliferated since 2016, since that normative statement came out. So we can't stop there. And the UN must recognize and grow its convening power. That's something Access Now prides itself on through this RightsCon event series, where we invite all stakeholders and have had great partnerships with the Office of the High Commissioner, as well as companies like Meta, whom we work with daily through our digital security helpline to ensure that their customers and clients stay safe in their use of the platforms. Those conversations take place at RightsCon, and that's a place to contest norms again, but on a civil society kind of led turf, which we're really proud to share. A couple last comments. Access Now is going to be engaging in a few projects. As I mentioned, our report on state sanctions and digital rights, as well as content governance in crisis. We're analyzing all Human Rights Council and General Assembly resolutions for where they do or don't speak to digital harms and digital technologies. So we hope to produce that mapping guidance soon. We're growing our community of work in the digital security sector, trying to raise those standards, and hopefully perhaps even announce and promote standards for digital security provision at places like the ITU and ISO. And then finally, we are looking to the skies, looking at satellite internet as the future of internet provision, and a place where, again, ICTs are advancing in lockstep, even with not just development, but armies and security sector without normative guidance. States are not waiting for permission. And that's why it's really incumbent on the Human Rights Council to have the support it needs to welcome inputs from other stakeholders like technologists and civil society, and to advance those norms so they resound. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Michak, for your insightful perspective on how various actors in both the public sector, including the UN system, and in the private sector can cooperate in the ways forward. Also, you highlighted the central role the Human Rights Council should play on this issue, and as an ambassador to participating in this council, you know, I felt more sense of the responsibility for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the panelists raised several critical issues, which I'm sure the audience would like to explore further. With that, now I'd like to open the floor to take questions and comments from the audience. And I have, I think, about 15 minutes for question and answer. And the audiences, you may raise your hand in the Zoom chat room to make an intervention. And as a courtesy for our speakers, I would appreciate it if you could identify yourself before you speak and tell us to whom you are addressing your question. Okay, while waiting for the hands up, I have one question to direct to Ambassador Twerman. If he's still in okay, I see him. Ambassador, how do you see the role of the Human Rights Council in the protection of human rights in the cyberspace? I think the role of a Human Rights Council in different aspects, you know, have been mentioned a few times during the presentation by the panelists. But specifically, I would like to hear your views about Human Rights Council's role in for the protection of the human rights in the cyberspace. Ambassador.
Thank you so much for this question. And of course, we heard already many ideas on this, and also how the council should go and what has been addressed. And maybe, as you mentioned in your introduction, in a previous function, I was closely involved in the negotiations for the establishment of the Human Rights Council. And at that time, there was a strong expectation that the Human Rights Council must be a forum to address really the key human rights situations and topics. And I think the Council has achieved to live up to this expectation, and people all around the world look to the Council to deal with the most pressing human rights issues affecting their lives. And certainly, as we've heard also from the many excellent interventions, new and emerging technologies are among those issues and a real game changer when it comes to the realization of human rights. And as we've also heard, the Council, a number of initiatives and resolutions are being undertaken to address different aspects to this. And we have also heard, reference was also already made that at this current session, Panama, together with us, Austria in the lead, is presenting a new resolution on the issue of new and emerging technologies in the military domain. And the reasons why this initiative is being presented, a number of the speakers have already pointed out. For us, a particular issue, certainly the question of autonomous weapon system, because there's a serious concern that such systems without meaningful human control and judgment would not be able to comply with human rights and OHCHR thresholds for the use of force, especially in unpredictable and ever-evolving environments. And there are many questions concerning the legal framework for the development and use. And we think that these questions need to be answered. And the Human Rights Council is also an important forum to do so. They touch upon the inherent dignity of the human rights, of the human person, and thus the foundation of human rights. So that's a key reason for us that we are presenting this initiative, and we hope for broad support, and we hope that it triggers discussions and also further promotes processes in other fora on this issue. Now, I think it is interesting to listen to the different ideas, also where the next resolution should go, what some of the key issues are. For us, certainly, there are a number of questions how we can further step up the role of the Council in all these questions. The key is also what happens in the Council itself, and how can the Council reach also other sort of the system broadly, how to mainstream human rights, both within the UN system, but also when it comes then to the private sector, etc. And there certainly much more needs to be done. I think we would also need to reflect and I guess liaise closely also with the UN Tech Advisor, what role the Council can play in the elaboration of the global digital compact. And the key question certainly is, how further to promote and ensure that both the obligation and primary responsibility of states to protect and promote human rights and the responsibility of businesses to respect human rights when it comes to the development and use of new technologies. And there, as we've also heard, OHCHR is doing important work to encourage businesses to implement the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. My sense is that very much the focus of our discussions and also of such cooperation is on big tech companies. But from a number of discussions also with, for instance, small and medium-sized tech companies who are often in the lead with developing cutting-edge applications, for instance, of artificial intelligence, there's also a real need that we have something that we can support such companies to give practical advice. I don't know, maybe in the form of modules and templates of how they can assess the human rights implications of the digital applications that they are developing, so to say, from the early design, development, and implementation. The other thing is, many have also mentioned that the convening power of the Human Rights Council, how to bring everyone together. And there certainly, in our view, the time has come for a more formalized dialogue between tech companies and governments and other stakeholders on human rights questions. And in our view, certainly the Human Rights Council is the right forum for such a dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Mr. Tiedemann, still, we have time, but I don't see any hands raised from the floor. So perhaps I think that having heard the statement from other panelists, some of the panelists may wish to speak for further points to add to what you have heard from other panelists, because we have still a few minutes time before I wrap up our discussion. So I would like to invite any panelists to add certain points in addition to what you have heard from their fellow panelists, if you have any points to add at this stage. Okay, Madam Hicks, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. There's so much that I could pick up, and I feel unfortunate that we can't go into greater detail on so many of the points. But I wanted to go back to the point about business and human rights and how that factors in. I neglected to mention, and I'm fortunate my colleague Natalie Stettleman put into the chat box, the report that we just did for the Council under this resolution around the application of the UN guiding principles. And I've heard from so many of the speakers work that's being done to take this issue forward and to really make it more actionable and practical. And I do think that that is a crucial point that we need to look at. I wanted to emphasize the references that were made to investors and how investment can be a trigger to push towards more human rights compliant approaches within the tech sector. I take Peter's comments that things need to move much more quickly, that we've had a lot of notice about what needs to be done. And I do think we need to be quite strong about the fact that the resources that are being dedicated, despite some of the great initiatives that Ian Levine mentioned at Meta and elsewhere, we're not keeping up with the demand here, and much more needs to happen much more quickly. And I would emphasize that with regards to both the point that Ambassador Tiedemann just made and one that I referenced, which is particularly on the BHR side, we need to do much more, as Bert said, to look at the small and medium enterprise level. We're really focused a lot on the top level and what is available to be done and how it gets done by small and medium enterprises is a crucial question that we need to spend more time on. But as I mentioned as well, it also requires us, and the two things go hand in hand really, to look beyond Western Europe and the US as the site of some of the biggest tech companies and really work in a cross-regional context. And we're fortunate to say that our sort of flagship project on business in the tech sector, our BTech project, which brings together a community of practice at the global level, is now moving forward with efforts to look at BTech in Africa, for example. And that's the type of work that really needs to be done across regions and at scale, really. We're still just starting to open the door on those initiatives. So really encouraging more engagement across the digital technology and telecommunications sectors to be able to bring in these conversations more. I also wanted to get back to the technical standard setting conversation a bit as well, and really appreciate Pritam's comments and the engagement by ITU on this. I think we all recognize that there is, to some extent, very much an open door for engagement, and even perhaps a thirst for engagement on the ethics and human rights side in these processes. The reality, of course, though, is that the processes, as Pritam described them, are large, complex, multifaceted, ongoing, in ways that we don't currently have in place a structure that allows for that human rights engagement at the level we would like. And certainly within our office, we don't have the resources to engage directly in some of those processes. So what we're hoping with ITU and other partners we can look at is, what are the methodologies that could better allow that sort of input to be brought in on a standardized basis rather than in an ad hoc way. And that includes, how can we really benefit from civil society engagement in these processes, which are very difficult for our civil society partners to cover currently. But Ambassador Turman mentioned, for example, human rights focal points, other ways to bring expertise in to make it more of an ongoing process and raise it up. So we've got some time before the report is due on that, but we have plenty of work to do in terms of elaborating those ideas and then really moving forward with some of our partners in terms of how to implement them. And we're really looking forward to that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, thank you very much. I see a hand up from Mr. Malur, ITU. You have the floor, Mr. Malur. Mute.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador. I just wanted to add, and thank you, Peggy, for recognizing the collaboration, the potential for the collaboration we have. We at ITU put in, have many of these, for lack of a better word, we have a Netflix of all these programs, all these, on new and emerging technologies, many on AI application in different domains, trusted AI, on trust and accountability, all this put online, including also on 5G, starting from the very simple to the very complex technical conversations. And I would invite the, the human rights lawyers, the delegates, the ethicists, people who may not be engineers, but obviously are, domain experts in their fields, to take advantage of this. And if you want some specialized training to be organized on understanding a particular technology, be it quantum, be it whatever, just let us know. We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I think we have arrived at the very end of this program today. Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in bringing this session to a close, I would like to thank once again all the panelists and the audience for being with us today and for your valuable input to the discussions. I believe that today's discussion is another solid reminder that the multi-stakeholder cooperation is critical in navigating the ways forward for new and emerging digital technologies guided by human rights perspectives. I hope the takeaways and insights gathered today will feed into our future discussions for our follow-up resolution to be tabled next year in the Council. In closing, I would like to convey once again my sincere gratitude to the colleagues from the core group and OHCHR for their close cooperation in organizing this virtual event. Finally, my special thanks, of course, go to the DiploFoundation for its invaluable support that has enabled this event to run smoothly. Thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ambassador.
Thank you.